Come on, don't be shy. Show us what you've really got. He sneered, swirling his scotch like it was a magic wand that could summon humiliation. That was the moment a wealthy tycoon decided to turn a black busgirl into his personal joke. All she had to do was play the piano in front of a packed restaurant for his entertainment. What he didn't know, that same piano was her weapon and her history. What unfolded next left the room breathless and him completely shattered. This isn't just a story about music, it's about dignity, identity, and standing tall when someone tries to make you feel small. As James Baldwin once said, the most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose. If this story moves you or makes your blood boil, don't scroll past. Leave a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe for more powerful stories where justice plays louder than hate. Your voice matters here. It was supposed to be just another Saturday night shift for Imani Carter. The air inside Bellamy's, a high-end French restaurant, tucked in the heart of Atlanta's art district, hummed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft glow of chandeliers. Imani, 23 years old, and barely 5 feet tall, moved quickly but quietly across the polished floors, clearing plates and wiping down tables with practiced grace. To most diners she was invisible, a background figure in a crisp black uniform, small framed with downcast eyes, but inside Imani carried a story no one knew. She had once dreamed of playing piano on grand stages. That dream had been carved in the silence of long nights, caring for her disabled grandmother, in the pain of losing her mother in a hit-and-run when she was just 14. Music had become her way of surviving the grief. Her fingers had danced over the cracked keys of an abandoned piano salvaged from a neighbor's junk pile, with no lessons, no formal training, just heart and YouTube. Imani taught herself Chopin, Beethoven, and jazz improvisation by ear. But dreams don't pay rent, so she tucked them away. Now she was just another busgirl with calloused hands and tired eyes, working late nights while her piano collected dust in her tiny studio apartment. At 7:46 p.m., the front doors opened, and in walked Grant Whitmore, the type of man who owned rooms before he even spoke. A real estate mogul turned minor celebrity, Grant was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in designer gray with a Rolex glinting on his wrist. He didn't walk, he glided, flanked by 2 younger associates and a woman in a red dress, who laughed too hard at every word he said. The hostess greeted him with a nervous smile and led the group to the largest corner table, directly across from the baby grand piano no one had touched in weeks. The room seemed to shift around him. Waiters stood a little straighter. Conversations dropped a few decibels. Imani didn't need to be told. This was the kind of guest you didn't mess up with. As she cleared a nearby table, she caught Grant's eyes on her, a second too long. She lowered her gaze. Later, as she delivered a round of wine to his table, Grant tilted his head, reading her name tag. Imani, he said, drawing out the syllables like a joke he hadn't finished telling. Tell me, do you do more than carry plates? She blinked, unsure if he was serious. Excuse me? You look like you've got a secret talent. Let me guess. Singer? Dancer? Psychic? She forced a polite smile. I play piano. Sometimes. Grant's eyes lit up like a cat spotting a cornered mouse. Well now, he said, chuckling. What are the odds? There's a piano right there. Imani stiffened. I'm just working tonight, sir. He waved off her protest. Oh, come on. Let the guests enjoy something other than overpriced steak for once. Show us what you've got. Laughter bubbled from his table. She shook her head. I really can't. I'm not. Too scared? He interrupted, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. Or maybe you're just not as good as you think. The jab was surgical, designed to wound. Her throat tightened. In the silence that followed, her mind went back to her mother's funeral. The first time she played Ballet No. 1 in front of anyone. Her hands trembled then too. Now, something inside her cracked open. Without a word, she set down her tray and walked toward the piano. The room went still. Forks paused. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Imani sat down, back straight, fingers hovering above the keys. Her reflection shimmered in the black lacquer lid. Grant smirked, sipping his wine like this was the show he'd ordered. She closed her eyes, then played. The opening bars were soft, hesitant, but each note dug deeper, growing bolder, more urgent. Ballade number 1 surged through the room like a confession. Pain, love, fury, every buried part of herself poured through her fingertips. By the time she hit the crescendo, the room was breathless. When the final chord faded, no one moved. Then applause, thunderous. Not polite clapping, a standing ovation. Grant sat frozen, wine glass halfway to his lips, mouth slightly open. Imani didn't look at him. She rose, nodded once to the room, and returned to work. No pride, no gloating, just grace, because the music had spoken, and she had nothing left to prove. Imani had never felt silence like that before. As she returned to the back of the restaurant, the echo of applause still buzzing in her ears, her breath trembled, her heart hadn't slowed down, not from nerves, but from release. For once, she hadn't swallowed her voice. She hadn't let herself shrink. That alone was more intoxicating than any standing ovation. Back near the dish station, her co-worker Marcus gave her a slow, stunned nod. "I didn't know you could do that," he whispered. "I didn't know I still could," she replied. Word spread quickly. Servers murmured as they passed, a few offering high fives or quick shoulder taps. Some diners tried to wave her over, offer compliments, even tips. But Imani stayed focused, quietly retreating into routine, refilling glasses, wiping down menus. It was safer there. But her bubble burst the moment she returned to Grant Whitmore's table. The energy had changed. His guests looked uncomfortable, whispering among themselves, stealing glances at Imani like they weren't sure whether to be ashamed or impressed. The woman in the red dress stared down at her head-empty wine glass. Grant, on the other hand, tried to play it cool. He leaned back in his chair and clapped slowly, mockingly, like an actor at the end of a play he hadn't enjoyed. "Well," he said, voice louder than necessary, "that was unexpected." Imani remained calm. "Was that all, sir?" Grant chuckled. "You know, for someone who clears tables, you've got quite the flair for drama." She didn't flinch. "And for someone who builds buildings, you're surprisingly fragile when your ego takes a hit." The air around the table dropped 10 degrees. One of Grant's companions choked back a laugh. Another glanced nervously toward the bar. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "I think I'm done speaking," Imani replied simply, stepping back. The tension rippled through the room, but she didn't wait for his response. Back in the kitchen hallway, she braced her back against the wall, exhaling hard. Her hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. Fear. Not of Grant, not anymore, but of what might come next. Would she be written up, fired, humiliated in some new way? But nothing came. No manager pulled her aside. No supervisor scolded her. In fact, her next customer smiled warmly and said, "That was the most beautiful thing I've seen in years." Imani nodded, thanking them quietly. Gratitude swelled in her chest, but she kept her emotions sealed tight. She'd learned long ago that too much joy could feel just as dangerous as too much sorrow. Either one could be taken from you in an instant. Later, as the night wore on, and the rush began to fade, one of Grant's associates, a younger man with kind eyes and a loosened tie, approached her near the coffee station. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to say, what you did earlier, that was incredible, really. You've got something rare." Bonnie looked at him, unsure what to say. He continued, "Don't let someone like him make you question it." She gave a small smile. "Thanks." He nodded, hesitated, then returned to his table. Near closing, as Imani totaled out her tips, she realized something strange. Tonight's earnings were nearly double her usual. Customers who barely made eye contact before had left generous cash. Notes scribbled on napkins said things like, "Never stop playing," or "You reminded me what real beauty is." She folded the bills carefully and tucked them into her apron, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than usual. Outside, the night air was crisp, almost electric. She walked slowly to her bus stop, each step light, unburdened. She wasn't thinking about the piano anymore. Not the song she'd played, not even Grant's face when she finished. She was thinking about her grandmother, about the nights they'd spent listening to scratchy records, the way her nana would close her eyes and hum along even when the speakers barely worked. She wished she could have tonight heard it. As she reached the corner, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something told her to. "Hello?" A man's voice replied. "Hi, is this Imani Carter?" "Yes. My name is Raymond Lowe. I was dining at Bellamy's tonight. I caught your performance. Listen, I'm a music producer based in Nashville. I don't want to take your time, but if you've got a few minutes, I think we should talk." She froze. "I'm not promising anything huge," he continued quickly. "But you've got something that deserves to be heard. I'd love to help you record a demo." Imani blinked into the streetlight, lips parted, trying to remember how to breathe. "Are you serious?" she finally asked.
"I am," he said.
"Call me back tomorrow. No pressure. But I think you've got a voice the world needs." She hung up, stunned. A gust of wind swept through the quiet street as her heart pounded again, not with fear but with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Imani barely slept that night. She lay awake in her small studio apartment, the hum of traffic outside blending with the melody still echoing in her head. Her fingertips tapped out imaginary notes on the bedsheet. The music producer's voice repeated in her mind, like a loop, "I think you've got a voice the world needs." By sunrise, she was seated at her upright piano. Its wood faded, a few keys stubbornly out of tune. She ran her fingers across them anyway, not to rehearse but to remember. This was the same piano she taught herself on at 15, when she had nothing but grief and second-hand sheet music from the library. The piano had followed her through 3 moves, 5 jobs, and nearly a decade of survival. Now somehow it was relevant again. At 10:02 a.m., she called Raymond Lowe. He picked up on the second ring. "Imani, glad you called." They spoke for nearly an hour. He told her he wasn't in the business of selling dreams, but of building them. He wasn't offering fame or a record deal, just a session, one shot, a small studio in Midtown Atlanta. He'd cover the cost. She could bring whatever piece she wanted. Classical, jazz, original, no pressure, no promises. She said yes before her fear could interrupt her. They scheduled it for Thursday. For the next 3 days, Imani juggled shifts at Bellamy's and hours at the piano. She picked out a piece she'd written herself, something she'd never played in public. She called it Naina's Waltz, a slow, soulful blend of gospel chords and romantic tension. It was raw, unfinished, but real. The night before the recording session, her nerves returned with a vengeance. What if it wasn't good enough? What if Raymond changed his mind once he heard it through studio speakers? What if Grant Whitmore was right, and all of this flicker of opportunity was just a fluke born of pity? Imani almost canceled, but then she remembered the look on the guests' faces at Bellamy's, the standing ovation, the warmth in her chest as she played, and she remembered her mother's voice, saying, "Never let fear decide your worth." So she went. The studio was tucked behind a coffee shop on a quiet street. It wasn't glamorous. No red carpet, no engineers with clipboards. Just Raymond, a gray-haired man in jeans and a hoodie, did it beside a grand piano in a soundproof room. He greeted her with a warm smile and a cup of tea. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," she said. The room was intimate. Just her, the piano, and a single red light above the booth. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes came gently, like raindrops on glass. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, easing into the rhythm. Then came the swell, the rising melody that carried her memories forward, of loss, of resilience, of every night she thought her music didn't matter. Halfway through, she forgot the room was even there. When she finished, the room was still. Raymond exhaled slowly. "There, May, that was beautiful." She stood up, lightheaded, unsure if he meant it. He walked into the room, nodding to himself. "You've got something rare. I don't say that lightly." "Thank you," she whispered. "I'd like to record a few more takes, just to capture some variation," he said. "But honestly, we've already got what we need." They spent the next 2 hours recording alternate versions, tweaking tempo and dynamics. He encouraged her, but never coached her, letting her guide the emotion. By the end of the session, Imani was exhausted, but buzzing. As they packed up, Raymond handed her a flash drive. "Here's your demo. Do with it what you will. Send it to programs, producers, whoever. I'll vouch for you if anyone asks." Imani held it like it was made of glass. Back on the sidewalk, she stared at the little device in her hand. It wasn't a record deal, it wasn't a billboard in Times Square, but it was something real, something hers. She walked home slower than usual, the weight of the moment sinking in. It wasn't just about the music, it was about reclaiming the part of herself she'd buried under bills, silence and self-doubt. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she believed in the possibility of forward. The demo sat on Imani's kitchen table for 3 days. Every morning, she'd glance at the flash drive while sipping coffee, her hand twitching to pick it up, only to talk herself out of it. The fear wasn't that it wasn't good. It was that it might be. And then what? What if it opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through? On the 4th morning, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hi, is this Imani Carter?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "My name is Marlene Fisher. I'm the program coordinator at the Atlanta Music Institute. One of our supporters passed along a demo with your name on it. I listened, and I'd love to talk." Imani's heart skipped. "You listened to it?" "I did, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. Would you be willing to come in for a meeting?" They scheduled for the following Monday. As soon as the call ended, Imani stood frozen in her tiny apartment, breath shallow, mind racing. She'd once stood outside that very building as a teenager, peeking in through glass doors, watching students rush between classes with sheet music in hand, wondering if she'd ever belong. Now they were calling her. She arrived early for the meeting, hands sweaty, despite the crisp Georgia breeze. The building looked exactly how she remembered. Sleek stone walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sculpture of a violinist outside the front entrance. She stared at her reflection in the glass and straightened her jacket. Marlene greeted her in the lobby with a firm handshake and warm eyes. "Imani," she said, "thank you for coming." They walked through a quiet corridor into a modest office filled with instruments and old show posters. Marlene gestured for her to sit. "Your piece, Nina's Waltz, was..." Imani nodded. "It moved me," Marlene said simply. "Not because it was perfect, but because it was alive, real." Imani swallowed hard. "Thank you. I want to offer you a scholarship spot in our adult artist development program," Marlene continued. "Part-time, flexible around your work schedule. It's not a full degree track, but it's something, and it's yours if you want it." Imani blinked. "Wait, what?" Marlene smiled. "Raymond Lowe vouched for you, said you needed a foot in the door. I trust him. But more than that, I trust what I heard." Imani didn't know what to say. 1,000 excuses flooded her brain. Money, time, self-doubt, but none of them could stand up to the hope rising in her chest. She nodded slowly. "I'd be honored." When she left the institute that afternoon, the world looked sharper, brighter, like someone had wiped dust off her future. She called her grandmother on the walk home, voice trembling with joy. "I got in, Nana." Her grandmother cried softly over the phone. "I always knew you would." The next week at Bellamy's, something had shifted. Customers smiled more. Co-workers called her maestro as a joke, but with pride behind it. Even the manager, usually too busy to tutor anyone, asked her how her music was going. But not everyone was thrilled. One night, while taking a break outside near the dumpsters, Imani heard footsteps behind her. She turned. It was Grant Whitmore. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said flatly. I'm not here to fight, he said. I came to apologize. She raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like you.
Grant sighed.
Look, I was a jerk. I've been thinking about that night. A lot. And I realized I tried to make you small because I felt small. That's not an excuse. Just the truth. Imani crossed her arms. And what exactly do you want from me now? Nothing, he said. Just wanted to say, I was wrong. That's it. She studied his face for a long moment. There wasn't the usual smirk. No arrogance. Just an awkward man trying to make something right. Thanks, she said quietly, but your opinion doesn't define me. He nodded. I know, that's kind of the point. Then, he turned and walked away. Imani stood in the cold for a minute, unsure what to feel. Closure, pity, relief, maybe all of them. But what mattered most was this. The power had shifted, and she hadn't even needed to raise her voice to take it back. She went back inside, tied her apron tighter, and finished her shift with her head held higher than ever before. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Imani sat alone in the rehearsal room at the Atlanta Music Institute, her fingers gliding gently over the ivory keys. The storm outside drummed against the windows like a quiet metronome, steady and relentless. She wasn't practicing for anyone else today. No auditions, no recordings, no audience. Just her, the piano, and the stillness that had once been so rare in her life. It had been nearly 6 weeks since her performance at Bellamy's changed everything. Since then, her days had taken on a new rhythm. Morning classes at the institute, lunch shifts at the restaurant, and late nights spent composing or walking the quiet streets with melodies in her head. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt the lightest it had in years. The Adult Artist Development Program had become a sanctuary. Imani had found herself surrounded by musicians of every background, former lawyers, retired teachers, 20-somethings with dreams still intact. They didn't care that they had no formal training. They only cared that she showed up and bled honesty into every note. One afternoon after class, Marlene pulled her aside. I got a call, she said. The Atlanta Cultural Alliance is putting together a local showcase. Small venue but serious ears in the crowd. I submitted your demo. They want you. Imani stared at her. You submitted it without asking? Marlene grinned. You'd have said no if I had. The showcase was in 2 weeks. For the next 14 days, Imani barely came up for air. She revised Nana's Waltz 3 times, rewrote the bridge, strengthened the outro, practiced until her fingertips throbbed. Some nights she cried from the pressure, not because she didn't believe in herself, but because for the first time she did. And that belief came with weight. The night of the showcase arrived cold and clear. The venue was intimate, maybe 150 seats, but the atmosphere buzzed with expectation. As Imani peeked out from backstage, she saw strangers, critics, teachers, and her grandmother. Seated in the second row with her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes already glassy. When Imani stepped onto the stage, the lights washed over her like morning sunlight. She sat at the piano, exhaled deeply, and began. From the first chord, the room hushed. Nana's Waltz wasn't just a piece anymore. It was a conversation, a memory, a promise. Her fingers moved with conviction, telling a story that didn't need words of love, of loss, of a young girl who refused to let circumstance steal her voice. At the final note, silence lingered before applause erupted, loud, long, and rising to a standing ovation. Imani stood slowly, her heart pounding, her chest full. She bowed. After the show, people came up to her, some with compliments, some with offers. A professor from a conservatory in New York handed her a card. A local jazz trio asked if she'd consider joining them. Mud session. Marlene hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. But none of that mattered more than the moment her grandmother shuffled up and touched her face. You brought me back to your mama tonight, she whispered. She heard you, baby. I know she did. Imani's throat clenched. She hugged her grandmother tight, letting the tears fall freely this time. The next morning, Back in her apartment, Amini stood in front of her small mirror. Same reflection, same girl, but something fundamental had changed. She no longer saw a waitress who happened to play piano. She saw an artist. She sat down at her old upright, the wood-chipped keys uneven, but still full of life. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote in big, bold letters across the top, "Debut album." The rain had stopped. Outside, the city stirred to life. And inside her, a new melody was already beginning to form. Sometimes, the loudest power comes from quiet resilience. Imani's story reminds us that no one can define your worth unless you hand them the pen. In a world quick to dismiss and label, holding on to your voice, your true voice, is revolutionary. Like Maya Angelou once said, "You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." Whether you're wiping tables, raising kids, or chasing dreams in silence, your passion has value, even when the world isn't watching. If this story stirred something in you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. If you're chasing your own dream or have been doubted before, hit that like button so we know we're not alone. And hey, subscribe to this channel for more stories that speak truth, dignity, and hope. One voice at a time. Let's grow this space together. Your story might be next.